more. We gotta break these walls, divided just because what really makes us strong. Peace to one and all. What are we fighting for? Who's gonna stop the wars? Apply a different force. Peace is what we want. They say the globe is war, it's causing all the storms. A lot of nation lost. Peace before it's gone.
Peace is what I dream. Something must have passed I never seen. A word we like to say, but people don't really know what it means.
They spilling blood for all, whatever's valuable. The ones who want the biggest piece, don't share it all. These banks are getting more, people are losing homes. They better get a world peace, and maybe more. These cops are on us hard, making and breaking laws. No justice, there will be no peace, cause that's the call. These streets are living raw, like they don't care at all. Come on, you got to put your pieces on the floor.
Peace across the world. Something we can all agree on. Bring it that I was born. What about
Because of 44, they say that hate is gone. It never left the core. Peace to right the wrongs. They say we came along, where we started from. I'm asking where we going. Peace, even beyond. We gotta be the spark to get us out the dark. We all can play the card. Peace, when will it start? Say it's impossible or just impossible. We gotta choose it all, cause peace ain't optional.
peace around the world? Something much easier said than done. Peace sacrifice. Make peace for everyone.
This is a freedom song. Will we all get along? Maybe if we drop the peace instead of bombs. They say it's time for change, but will it stay the same? Can we at least just have a peace to play the game? What are we leaving for? The babies yet unborn. I know before I'm gone, peace is what I'm working on. We running out of time. Let's not get left behind. Get yours, cause I won't get my peace. Peace, my peace of mind.
Every day we shout for peace. I've been living with the peace. The craziness in this world, taking full responsibility. Not blaming you on me. Somebody has to be strong. Every day we shout for peace. I've been living with the peace. The craziness in this world, taking full responsibility. Not blaming you on me. Somebody has to stand tall.
Peace, peace, everybody needs peace. Everybody scream peace. Tell them what you want. Peace. Everybody needs peace. Everybody wants peace. Everybody needs peace. Everybody scream peace.
American English, American English, American English, webinar series. Teach and learn. American English, webinar series.
Welcome to the American English webinar series, brought to you by the American English team at the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. embassies around the world. We're so excited to have so many teachers from all around the globe joining us. And here you can see a group in Indonesia watching the webinar. My name is Jenny, part of the American English team, also known as Moderator Jenny. And you'll see my friends, Moderator Katie and Moderator Heather, in the chat box to help you. As you know, this program is called the American English Webinar Series. Each webinar is 60 minutes long, and our topics are related to the monthly edition of the Teacher's Corner, which is a special part of the American English website that you can find lots of resources for teaching. So here you can see our exciting schedule for American English Webinar Series 2. So you can see that we have 5 more webinars after today, through March. So during these webinars, you will hear but not see the presenter, and the way for you to participate is by using the chat box, as you are already doing. And this is where you can ask questions and make comments related to today's topic. We may not always be able to answer every question during the session, as there are often hundreds of teachers participating, but there is another place for you to ask questions after the session is over, which we'll look at in just a moment. So the presenter may also ask you questions in the form of polls, and those are multiple choice questions that appear on the screen. We know that sometimes you may experience individual technical issues, and we'll try our best to help you, although we may not be able to fix them. But a great way to follow along if you do lose sound is by watching the caption pod that you see at the bottom of the screen. There are 6 webinars in each series, and during the series, the webinars take place every other Wednesday. If you participate in at least 4 out of 6 webinars, you'll receive an e-certificate from your RELO, your Regional English Language Officer, or your local U.S. Embassy. And if you do have questions about those certificates, please direct them to your RELO or U.S. Embassy. So to ensure that you're eligible for these certificates, we will ask you to submit your attendance, and you can only do this at the very end of the webinar. Please do not submit it before then. We will provide you with a link that you'll click on, and this is where you'll fill out the requested information. So as I mentioned before, there's another place where you can ask questions to the presenter. This is our Ning site, and we hope that most of you are already familiar with it, but if not, you do need to register to join this site. So again, this is where you can ask the presenter questions. This is also where you'll find pre-webinar readings and other resources related to the topic, and discussion questions, as well as the recordings of these webinars in case you want to watch them again. And as I mentioned before, every month on our americanenglish.state.gov website, we have a teacher's corner that has a specific topic. This month is making learning fun. So you can find more resources related to this topic in addition to our webinar today. And now for today's session, Making Learning Fun, Interactive Activities to Build Student Motivation and Engagement in Your Classroom. Today, our presenter, Amy Rich, will show you how to spark your students' intrinsic motivation in the English classroom. She will outline tips for engaging your students in meaningful ways and present several student-approached activities that can turn even the dullest lesson into something fun. So we hope this topic is relevant for everyone. Please raise your hand if you do not like fun, and we'll see if there's anyone that it's not relevant for, but I think everyone will enjoy this session, and I'm happy to introduce Amy Rich. Amy has worked in the ESL field for over 12 years, both in the US and abroad. She has worked in Japan, Kenya, Italy, Ireland, Morocco, Tibet, Israel, Palestine, and served as an English language specialist in Amman, Jordan. Amy is currently a moderator for our American English webinar series and produces the webinar videos for the American English YouTube channel. We're so excited to have you here, Amy. Welcome.
Thanks for your introduction, Jenny. Welcome, teachers from around the world. I'm very excited to be with you here today as a presenter this time to talk about making learning fun by using interactive activities to build student motivation and engagement in your classroom. So, before we get started, let's look at our pre-webinar poll results. I asked you, How do you engage your students in the classroom? Now, I saw that almost all of you get to know their interests. The majority of you show them respect and ask them to share their opinions. About 50% of you cultivate trust with them. And only about a third of you allow them to make decisions about coursework. So I'm going to explain a little later how you can include your students on some of the classroom decision making. But for now, let's take a look at today's goals. Today, I will identify factors that increase student motivation. I'll equip you with some tips for engaging your students, and I'll share some interactive activities that can motivate your students to learn. So, speaking of motivating your students to learn, what does the word motivation mean to you? Feel free to share your thoughts right now in the chat box. What does the word motivation mean to you? A force, life, readiness, great interest, great interests. That's a good one. Okay. An aim, making people interested. Excellent answers. Motivation is defined as a force or influence that causes someone to do something. It's an internal process that makes a person move towards a goal. Now, when we talk about motivation in schools, we're generally talking about our students' motivation to learn. So, what do we know about motivating our students? We know that higher student motivation leads to higher student engagement, and that higher student engagement results in higher achievement, better understanding of concepts, more satisfaction with school, and a lower dropout rate. We also know that there are two types of motivation: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So, do you know what the difference is? Let's go to the chat box. First, I want you to think about intrinsic motivation. Try to write down some samples of intrinsic motivation. Okay, a positive attitude, something that comes from inside, something internal, something inner. Everyone's saying internal, inner. Yes, exactly. You guys have got it. Now let's move on to extrinsic motivation. How about writing some samples of extrinsic motivation? How is that different from something that comes from inside? Okay, something external, like money, rewards. Those are great examples. Okay, more money. Stickers, yes, exactly. Okay, these are things, sort of physical things you can receive. Great, you've hit it. Now I'm going to outline these terms in a little more detail. What I'd like you to pay close attention to is the reason for a student's effort, depending on the type of motivation that's being hit. So intrinsic motivation is our natural curiosity and desire to learn that we're all born with. So when your students engage in a behavior or perform an activity because it's personally rewarding, they are being intrinsically motivated. This could be when they participate in a class game because they find it enjoyable, or when they compete in a class contest because they like the challenge. Extrinsic motivation is when we perform a behavior or engage in an activity in order to receive an external reward. This is when your students study in order to receive a good grade, or when they compete in a class contest to win a prize. Again, their motivation is to try to receive something for their effort. So now that I've outlined these two types of motivation in more detail, let's go to the polls. I want to know which type of motivation, intrinsic or extrinsic, do you think leads to higher student engagement in the classroom? Okay. It looks like most of you are saying intrinsic motivation leads to higher student engagement in the classroom. Those of you who said intrinsic motivation are right. However, in the past, it was believed that the best way to motivate young people was through the use of extrinsic rewards. This idea was based on experiments done with animals in which animal behaviors could be manipulated by rewarding treats. As a result, parents and educators alike have relied heavily on the use of extrinsic rewards, such as grades, gold stars, money, and praise to motivate learners. Even I am guilty of this. Remember, when students are extrinsically motivated, they participate because they expect an outcome like a reward. More recently, though, researchers have found that people do not just passively respond to their environments, that actually people have an innate desire to learn for the sake of learning, that they are motivated to learn because they find learning enjoyable, are passionate about learning, or just like the challenge. It is stimulating our students' intrinsic motivation, that passion for learning, that I will focus on throughout my webinar. Why? Because research shows that when students work on a task for intrinsic reasons, it's not only more enjoyable for them, but it also facilitates higher learning and achievement. So, how can we ignite our students' internal desire to learn? First, I'm going to share my 4 tips for cultivating intrinsic motivation in your students. And after, I'll show you some great activities you can do with your students to better engage them both inside and outside of the classroom. My first tip for cultivating intrinsic motivation in your students is to create a healthy learning environment. Let's go back to the chat box. Tell me, what do you do to try to create a healthy learning environment in your classroom? What do you do to create a healthy learning environment in your classroom? Okay, you put them in circles for group work. You cultivate trust. Daniela says you respect them. You help them feel relaxed, give them confidence. More group work. Okay, and try to be honest with them. Okay, these are excellent answers. Well, you can start by building good relationships with your students. Get to know them early. Learn their names by using icebreakers and also get to know their parents. Provide opportunities for parents to collaborate. Invite them to performances, class presentations, and show and tell. Cultivate trust. Let students make decisions and help them feel comfortable asking questions. Show students that asking questions is not only okay, it's also expected. Also offer them your support and encouragement. Studies have found that students who felt their teachers were supportive and cared for their success were more likely to be engaged in the classroom and perform better. And this is a big one for cultivating trust. Never ridicule a student's confusion or make fun of an incorrect response. If you do, you may never regain their trust. A side note on trust. Always remember that you're an authority figure to your students, and that while building trust does include being friendly with students, it does not mean you should act as a student's friend. Indicate interest in your students. Make eye contact, give insightful feedback, and encourage students to respond to each other. Also, create an environment that embraces your students' own backgrounds and cultures. This shows your interest in them. And finally, help your students to believe in themselves by focusing on your students' strengths. Explain to them individually how they can improve. Emphasize their effort rather than their intelligence. Why should you do this? Because studies show that when you praise a student for being intelligent, they can begin to fear that making a mistake will cause them to lose their intelligence status. So it's better to praise a student's effort. This will encourage them to learn through their hard work. My second tip for cultivating intrinsic motivation in your students is to figure out what your students are into. Do you know this idiom? To be into something? What I mean is, what do your students like? What are they passionate about? So let's go to the chat box. Think about your students. What are they into? What are they passionate about? Superheroes, music, sports, soccer, fun, football, lots of football, games, songs, video games. Okay, great. If you're not sure what they're into, make an effort to discover their interests. You can simply ask them, what are you into, like I just did with you, or facilitate a creative activity to find out what they like, such as student-to-student interviews, 2 truths and a lie, bingo, and so on. So, why does it even matter what they're into? Well, it matters because if the topics you choose to present in your classroom are meaningful to your students, they're going to be way more interested in the material and engaged. Okay, now that you've discovered what your students are into, it's time to try incorporating those interests into your lesson. For example, if your students like sports, like so many of them do, select materials related to sports that they might not know much about, such as extreme sports or daredevils. Or are your students into social media? Use this knowledge to make your lesson plans more dynamic. Instead of having students write a reflection for homework that only you will read, you could ask them to contribute to your class Facebook page by sharing their thoughts in the comments section of your post. This is far more interactive than writing a reflection, as students can respond to each other's thoughts, which might even bring forth some healthy debates. Now, if you don't use Facebook with your students, don't worry. Here's another option. You can have your students write reflections in their journals, and after have them exchange their journals with another student and write responses to each other's entries. Finally, take student involvement a step further by allowing students to make some choices in the classroom. Engaging students in the learning process helps to increase their attention, focus, motivates them to use critical thinking skills, and promotes meaningful learning experiences. So, how can we better engage them? How can we allow them to make decisions? Well, you can let them make choices about class rules, goals, content, and homework. You can allow them to share their expectations related to the course content. You can teach them to reflect and take control over their own learning by using weekly reflections that allow them to give feedback on their own performance and where they feel they can improve. And finally, you can empower them by showing them where they can access additional resources online that might help them in those areas they feel they need to improve. So, now you know my 4 tips for cultivating intrinsic motivation in your classroom. Let's put them into action. For the rest of my webinar, I'll be presenting engaging activities I've often used in the classroom that incorporate my 4 tips. I hope you find some of these activities helpful in igniting your students' passion to learn. But before we start, let's go back to the polls. What do you do in your classroom to motivate your students to learn? Okay, sing songs is a big hit. Use technology, play games. Okay, a lot of you are playing games. That's great. We're going to talk about games later. And I'm actually surprised not more of you are using technology. Actually, right now, we're going to talk specifically about using technology. Technology-based activities are really, really great. But if you don't have access to technology in your schools, don't worry. I'll be also presenting some non-tech-based options as well. But first, let's look at motivating our students through technology. So, if you're hoping to motivate your students intrinsically with something they will truly enjoy, using technology is probably the best place to start. Let me tell you, the moment I bring technology into my classroom, my students' faces brighten right up. So take a look at this list of different types of technology. Most of you are probably familiar with these items, but do you know how to incorporate them in your classroom? From my own experience working with teachers, many are a little intimidated by the thought of using technology in their classrooms, or they don't quite know how to incorporate it. So raise your hand if the thought of using technology in your classroom makes you feel nervous. That's a lot of you. Okay, you guys can put your hands down. Don't worry, you're not alone. I hope I can help you by giving you some fun and easy ideas for incorporating technology into your classroom. And we're going to start with one of my favorites, an app competition. So here's a really innovative activity you can do with your students that they will love. Many of your students own a smartphone and are familiar with using different types of apps. Now, since we're on the topic of apps, let's go to the chat box. Tell me, which apps do you use? Which apps do you personally use on your phone? WhatsApp, okay. Bubble collecting. Tinder, uh-oh. WeChat, podcasts, okay. Great, great, great. You guys know what apps are, you're using them, great. Okay. A really fun way I incorporate technology concepts in my classroom is through an app competition activity where teams work to create a new innovative app idea. And students, especially teenagers, love it. This is a fast-moving activity, but can be modified to last a little longer. So, how does it work? Well, you start by dividing your students into groups of maybe 3 and 4 and give them 10 minutes to brainstorm a concept for an app. The idea should be original, or at least one they've never heard of. During this time, you can walk around providing assistance, keeping students on topic, helping them with vocabulary, encouraging them, and making sure they've come up with an idea that's new. Now, depending on your class, you can choose any length of time for each of the steps I'm going to describe. Okay, so after about 10 minutes of brainstorming, ask everyone to stop. Each group should have their idea. Explain that they now have another maybe 15 minutes to create a poster that includes their app name, an outline of what the app is, how it functions, and an app logo. While they're working, be sure to walk around and monitor, provide assistance. You guys can, if you want, take a look down here. You can see some of the posters one of my classes created. Okay, on to the next stage. So after about 15 minutes, they must again stop. Now it's time to move into the presentation stage of the competition. Give teams about 5 minutes to work on their oral presentations. Once ready, each group takes turns presenting their app ideas to the rest of the class. And finally, after presentations comes the big vote. Each group must vote for the best app, and they cannot vote for themselves. To make sure teams aren't just voting for their friends, ask them to explain why they voted for the particular app they voted for. Now, here are just a couple of tips for facilitating the activity. Teachers should pre-teach the word or concept of an app, just like I did with you. You can ask, what's your favorite app? Or which apps do you use? They'll surely understand after that. Also, this should be sort of a fast-moving activity. That's what makes it fun. So try to set strict time limits. And finally, remember that you need to be constantly monitoring groups to ensure they're sticking to the task. All right, my next Teaching with Technology activity is called Newspaper Hunt. So, if you'd like to get your students reading, specifically something culturally rich like a newspaper, here's a fun activity you can facilitate. Before class, choose an online newspaper source and make up several focus questions based on its front page articles. As you can see here, I've chosen Voice of America's online paper. Now, before you start panicking, don't you worry. You don't have to be able to read the small print in this screen capture. I'm just using it as an example. So, once in class, pair up your students and have them locate the online newspaper you've chosen. In order to answer the questions you've pre-created, your students will have to skim through articles in the newspaper. You can see here some sample questions that I've made for my newspaper hunt. What's the temperature in Washington, D.C.? How many people were hurt in the California storm? What's the #1 pop song in America this week? And what movie is the top grossing American movie ever? You can make the questions as easy or difficult as you like, depending on your student's language level. And without even knowing it, your students will be reading English, exposed to new vocabulary and American culture, and having fun. Now, for those of you who don't have access to the internet or don't have Wi-Fi, you can do this exercise with a real English newspaper. You can just bring in a couple copies to class or even photocopies. Another great technology-based activity you can do with your students is to arrange for them to interview an expert in the field via any video app, such as Skype, Facebook, FaceTime, Google Hangouts. So, what do I mean by expert in the field? Well, just someone who knows about a particular topic. So, take a look at this picture here. You can see me on Skype with a bunch of children. That's because I was an expert in the field for a third grade class in Vermont, US, that was learning about the Middle East. Since I was living in Jordan at the time, they wanted to ask me all sorts of questions. They stood in line and asked questions one by one, such as, are there camels in Jordan? What's the weather like? What holidays do people in Jordan celebrate? So, let's go to the chat box. What are you an expert in the field in? Feel free to write silly answers too. Oh, I see someone's from Jordan. Okay, ELT, baking, the Bible, okay, cooking, cinema, baseball, excellent. Now think about your students. What are they curious about? Why not connect them with an expert in the field? This is a great way to motivate your students to speak and practice how to ask questions in English. Here are a few more technology-based ideas for your classroom. So, if your students are not excited about writing assignments, use ePals to motivate them. An ePal is an email pen pal, so someone your student can write via email. ePals will give your students opportunity to practice their English in a meaningful way and also make new friends. This is certainly more motivating than writing a hypothetical letter, and of course, great preparation for those future business emails they'll be writing. So, where can you find ePals for your students? Well, why not find them here in the chat box amongst your fellow teachers, or maybe even in the Ning? If you don't have someone you can pair up with that you've maybe met on the Ning or in the chat box, make sure to take advantage of ESL message boards. You can post your requests for ePals on any ESL message board. How about music? Most of you have probably used gap fills in your classroom, where words are missing from song lyrics, and students must listen to a song in order to fill them in, but why not take it a step further? Inspire your students to write their own lyrics to a popular song. Tabitha Kidwell presented a great activity on making songs with students during last season's American English webinar series. It'll be available soon on the American English YouTube channel, so be sure to check it out. I'm pretty sure almost all your students are using social media, so take advantage of this. This is a great English learning opportunity. Encourage them to change their Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media profiles to English. Suggest they like pages and news sources in English, so those news sources in English pop up into their news feed. This will maximize their English language exposure. Short films are another great tool to use in the classroom. I like to turn any short film into a critical thinking exercise. This is a great activity for upper level classes. Two of my favorite short films available on YouTube are The Black Hole and A Gift. Definitely check those ones out. And finally, please raise your hand if you watched Jeff Kuhn's amazing webinar last season on using podcasts in the classroom and making them with your students. Okay, excellent. A lot of you caught it. For those of you who did see it and those who did not, I recommend you all watch Jeff's two-part series, which is now available on the American English YouTube channel. Don't miss them, they're great. There's Jeff. Okay, another way to motivate your students intrinsically is through the use of games. And I saw in some of our polls that most of you are using games. So let's go to the chat box. I'm interested in knowing how often you use games in your classroom. Are you using them every day, every week? Every week, every day, daily? Okay, pretty often. Well, playing games is a great way to motivate learners of any age, but the best type of games in the English language classroom are those that challenge students while also allowing them to practice an English point. And when I say games, I don't mean video games. There's much you can do with good old-fashioned classic games such as board games. My first using games idea is to play Jeopardy! For those of you who don't know Jeopardy! It's a famous American TV show where contestants compete to answer trivia questions. Playing Jeopardy! Is a great way to review material you've used over the course of your class. You can create your own version for the classroom pretty easily. All you need is some paper, tape, and a wall. This is how it works. Before class, you'll need to create the actual trivia questions. So choose 6 categories, and you can see on my little Jeopardy! Board here, I have 6 that go across the top, and make 5 questions for each category. So take a look at my questions columns. Notice that the value of the questions increases. This is because the more difficult the question is, the more it's worth. So the question for 100 should be the easiest and 500 the most difficult to answer. So let's take a look at one of the easy questions. American cities for 100. Question is, this American city is home to the Statue of Liberty. And because I know you guys are all smart, I'm going to reveal the answer. New York City, my hometown. Okay, let's continue. So students can be divided into teams of 3 to 5, and each team should choose 1 team representative. This is the only person who's allowed to raise their hand to answer questions for the team. One team starts by choosing a category and dollar amount. The host reads the question, and the first team rep to raise their hand can answer. Teams play until all questions have been answered, and the team with the highest score wins. Board games are a really fun way to introduce new vocabulary and review speaking points. They're also a welcome change from your regular speaking, reading, and writing exercise routine. Most of you probably know Jenga, a game where players try to remove wooden blocks from a stack and place them on top without tipping the stack over. So take a look at this photo here. Here's a picture of Jenga. I like to play this game in my classroom, but with a twist. I ask my students to write English questions on the blocks. Now, when they take turns pulling out the blocks, they have to read the question on the block out loud and answer it before placing it back on top of the stack. You can allow the questions to be topic-free, or you can zero in on a specific topic. For example, if you're teaching your students how to give advice in English, they might write questions like, which movie should I go see tonight? Or, what's the best way to stay in shape? You can score the game any way you'd like. Here are 2 tips for you though. While your students are writing questions, be sure to check all the blocks to make sure they're appropriate before the game begins. And also, have your students write on the blocks in pencil so they can be easily erased afterwards. Games are such a great intrinsic motivator, and there are tons of other board games that you can use in your ESL classroom. So, let's go to the chat box. What specific games do you use in your classroom? Taboo, I love that one. Snakes and ladders, bingo, lots of taboo. Password, hangman, Scrabble. Okay, great. I'm a big fan of the games listed on this page here, especially Activate, brought to you by the great team at American English. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of Activate, but if not, it's a package that offers several board games that allows your students to learn American English in a fun, meaningful way. So you can check out some example activities from my Ning discussion thread, or also moderator Heather, I believe, has put a link up in the chat box as well. So if you don't have access to these games listed on my page, you don't have the physical game in your home country, here's a tip for you. You can go online, and there are printable versions of most of these games available, including printed versions for Activate. Now, what if you don't have access to these games and you don't have the internet? Well, here's another idea for you. Why not have your students make their own games? My students did that here and had a blast. This is a fabulous way to promote active learning, a topic I'm going to touch upon now. When students are passive, when they're not active, their brains don't do a very good job of processing or retaining information. According to some recent studies, a teacher says about 100 to 200 words a minute, and a student hears about 50 to 100 of those words. That's only half. Worse yet, in a typical lecture-style class, students pay attention just 40% of the time. We know that students learn best when learning is active. Active learning in the English language classroom means that students are mentally involved with the language, that they discover, investigate, and interpret English, often through hands-on activities, like making a board game, for example. So, how can we make our classrooms more active? Well, we can use role plays. We can use visuals such as film, PowerPoints, objects, photographs, cartoons, ads, maps, or newspapers. We can sing songs, use the internet, read books, and so on. Here are some specific activities that I like to use in my classroom. I love doing cooking demonstrations. Our students love to eat, and many of them even enjoy cooking. One of my favorite food activities to bring to the classroom is live cooking demonstrations. I do this because I like to give my students the opportunity to share about their home culture, and food is a big part of that. Presenting how to cook with real objects in the room, or realia, will make the learning experience more memorable for your learners, especially if they can see, touch, smell, and taste the food. In addition, they'll be able to practice food vocabulary and imperative statements. Here's a fun idea. Take anything that has to be built in steps and turn it into an exciting race. I took something very silly, like a ring made out of a dollar bill, and challenged pairs of students to race to see who could make it first. Okay, so you probably don't really know what I mean right now, but take a look at that red arrow on the screen. You can see the finished product right there. So that was a dollar bill that got turned into a ring. Really cool, right? Well, my students thought it was really cool too, and were super motivated to make it. Here's how the race works. You have to split your class into pairs. So, into partner A and partner B. Place partner A and partner B on opposite ends of the room. Each end of the room should have a long table. So if you look at the diagram in the middle, you can kind of see this. Partner A is at table A, partner B is at table B. Okay. Partner A has a dollar bill at their table. So each partner A has a dollar bill. They will be the ring maker. They must stay at the table throughout the entire race. They cannot leave their table. Partner B has the instructions for making the dollar bill ring at their table. They are the instruction giver. They can move back and forth from their table to their partner's table to give them instructions orally, but the instructions must never leave the table. So the physical instructions on paper can never leave the table. So partner B runs back and forth to partner A, telling them the instructions step by step. The first team to complete the ring wins. And you can see on the right, the winning team for this particular ring making competition. They're really proud there with their ring. Now, some of you teach very large classes. For a large class, you can make this more of a team activity. So maybe you'd have 2 people making the ring on one team and then 2 people giving the instructions. So there are actually 4 people on a team. But I warn you, it might get pretty loud. But as long as they're using English and having fun, I think it's a success. Another active learning idea I have for you is simple. Feed your students' interests. What do I mean? Well, remember when you took the time to find out what your students were into? I want you to literally feed those interests. Even the strangest interests can be turned into an active and engaging classroom lesson. For example, I had a class of teenage girls who were obsessed with painting their nails. I thought to myself, how in the world can I turn this interest into an active class lesson? Well, I decided to first create a critical thinking exercise about the history of nail polish. On that topic, let's go to the polls. I'm about to ask you a very silly question. Okay. Which people were the first to wear nail polish? Which people were the first to wear nail polish? Okay, a lot of you are saying the Egyptians, and almost everyone guesses this. I thought that was the correct answer too. But actually, those who guessed Chinese polish originated in China about 4,000 years ago. It was made from a mixture of beeswax, egg whites, gelatin, vegetable dyes, and gum, and the colors gold and silver symbolize royalty. This exciting new information gave me the opportunity to also teach some fun new vocabulary. So, after my lesson on the history of nail polish, we got a little hands-on. I had instructed each student to bring in a nail polish color the day before. They were now allowed to take that nail polish out and create some great art designs on each other's nails. They had so much fun with our lesson on nails that after I saw them showing off their new designs and also quizzing friends about the origins of nail polish. So, how about any other topic? Football, video games, yoga. Feed your students' interests by maybe having them research and make presentations about the different aspects of that topic. And then afterwards, try to arrange some sort of actual physical activity that matches up with it. This is a class they'll surely never forget. My next series of activities for motivating your students involve getting out of the classroom. Respected linguists Stephen Krashen and Tracy Turrell said the purpose of language instruction is to allow the learner to understand language outside of the classroom. Find ways to give students the opportunity to utilize their English skills outside of the classroom by sending them into the real world to practice what they've learned. Why should you do this? Because the language they encounter in the outside world is authentic. Because students can see their own progress when they interact in an authentic setting, which can help them to build confidence. And because sending students into the real world helps them become independent learners who can make use of the English community in their own time outside of class. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how can I expose my students to authentic English if I don't even live in an English-speaking country? Now I'm going to give you some ideas for creating authentic get out of the classroom opportunities for your students. How about doing a photo scavenger hunt? This is a fantastic way to help your students build vocabulary and teach them about the history of different cultures. For a lower level class, you could focus strictly on vocabulary. Make a list of things that students must take photos of. So here's a list I've created. Then put students into pairs or teams, each with their own camera or smartphone, and have them go around and take photos. The team that comes back first with all of the photos is the winner. Now for a higher level class, you can use more abstract language. So check out this sample list. For example, something spooky depends on a student's own experience and interpretation of that concept, of the concept of that word. Alternatively, you could come up with creative clues that your students must first solve and then take pictures of. Like these, for example. So this was the site of a famous battle in 1600. All right, here's another get out of the classroom idea for you that'll help help make learning about culture active. Take a look at these pictures of one of my old American culture classes. As you can see, we are learning how to knit. So I was teaching them about youth culture in Brooklyn, New York, and how activities that used to be uncool had come into fashion again for young people, such as knitting, which we usually think about older people when we think of knitting. They were fascinated by this and wanted to learn more. So I found a local yarn shop that was willing to talk to my students about knitting and teach them how to make basic stitches. This was an incredibly fun and memorable day. My students were exposed to new concepts, vocabulary, and they felt like they were a part of the Brooklyn, New York youth culture movement. This experience bonded us as a class, which noticeably raised their enthusiasm in the classroom. So, where else might you be able to take your students to expose them to English, especially authentic English? Well, does your town have an English-speaking community? Why not connect with them at a community center or on social media and set up a language exchange with your students? A language exchange is when people who speak different languages meet to practice each other's language. So if your students speak French, they would meet with a group of people who speak English. They could spend maybe the first half of the exchange, 30 minutes, speaking French with the English speakers, and the second half, 30 minutes, speaking English with them. This would be mutually beneficial for your students who want to learn English and the English speakers who are interested in your students' native language and culture. This is also a great way for your students to make new friends. How about a photo walk? Most of your students probably have phones that they can take pictures with. Now, a photo walk is different from a photo scavenger hunt that we talked about. A photo walk is not a competition. Its main purpose is for students to take pictures of things that interest him or her. To make your photo walk engaging in English, take your students outside and ask them the names of things in English. This is a great opportunity for them to learn new vocabulary, perhaps related to nature, city life, etc. Here are some photos my students took in the desert. Or here's another idea. Take your students on a tour in English. So do you know someone who runs a business in your community that can speak English well? Take advantage. Help expose your students to authentic language. Other places that might offer tours in English are museums, historical sites, universities, factories, and sports venues. Take a look at this photo. Once I even arranged a tour at a coffee roaster for a group of my students who are obsessed with coffee. As I mentioned before, with the language exchange, find out how to connect with the English-speaking community in your town. Social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, and Meetup.com are probably the best ways to do this, but also check out community centers and libraries, English-speaking clubs, American culture clubs, etc. Once you're connected with the English-speaking community in your town, you'll have access to tons of events in English that are taking place locally. Take your students to see movies in English, plays, concerts, poetry readings, especially if it allows them to listen to a native speaker. Here's a tip for you. When I leave the classroom, I like to keep my students engaged by creating quiz sheets they can fill out during their trip. Now, some extension exercises you can do once you return to your classroom, so after your trip, are presentations about your trip. So you could arrange in advance for certain groups to focus on a particular aspect of your visit, or they could make a travel guide, for example, advising others on the best way to enjoy the attraction. Or how about a podcast that discusses the places that they visited? Or maybe even facilitate a class debate that centers around the issues raised at a particular site. We're now coming to the end of my webinar. I have presented several activities that I hope will challenge your students and capture their attention and curiosity. And I challenge you to take student engagement one step further by helping your students attain the intrinsic reward. I want them to be fully immersed in learning in an enjoyable and meaningful way. So, how can you help them reach the intrinsic reward? Well, take the activities I presented even further. For example, are your students proud of the photos they took on their photo walk? Don't stop there. Inspire your students to share their work with others by setting up an exhibition of their best photos with descriptions of the photos in English, like I did with my students here. Did your students have a blast creating their own lyrics to a popular song? This is the perfect opportunity to showcase their hard work. Arrange for them to perform it in front of other classes, their parents, or even the public. Have your students created unique materials throughout the course of your class? Why not work on showing them off in a class magazine that incorporates their different talents, such as poems, songs, art, opinion pieces, jokes, and so on? And remember that app competition? Why not arrange to have your class help facilitate the app competition for a lower level English class? This type of inter-student interaction, where students teach other students what they have learned, is mutually beneficial for your students and those they are teaching. In closing, I encourage you to work on cultivating a healthy learning environment for your students, one in which they feel safe, cared for, and engaged. And I challenge you to ignite your students' intrinsic motivation by trying out some of the activities I outlined in my webinar. As you as a teacher begin to experience those special moments when you know your students are making the connection between learning and their own lives, I promise that your own passion for learning will be ignited and your commitment to teaching will become even stronger. Before I say goodbye, here are the references I use to put my webinar together. Feel free to take a look at them to read up a little more. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's really been a pleasure to spend time with you and share. I hope you found this time useful, and I thank you kindly for your very thoughtful responses in the chat box. They were great. I'm looking forward to seeing you all over in the Ning later for some post-discussion talking, and I bid you farewell. Bye, guys. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
By making learning fun. I think we all learned a lot today and have activities that we can use tomorrow in our classroom. So thanks so much. And of course, we'd like to thank you, our audience members, for your really enthusiastic consideration of the great ideas presented for us today. And of course, be sure to check out all the great resources and the Teacher's Corner edition for January on americanenglish.state.gov. Our next webinar takes place right here on February 3rd, and it will be entitled The Flipped Classroom, Preparing Students for In-Class Learning with Online Activities, and that will be presented to us by Andrew Screen. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again for attending this session. And now, of course, it's time to submit your attendance. Please remember that attendance in 4 out of 6 webinars will earn you an e-certificate from your local U.S. Embassy. Please don't enter your email address in the chat box, but go ahead and follow the links that are provided there and follow the simple instructions to submit your attendance one time. You'll see something similar to the image here on this slide when you enter the site, so please make sure that you take your time and enter the information correctly. If you're watching as an individual, you will enter the number 1 in the box that asks for the number of participants. And if you're leading a viewing session, you will enter the number of people who are watching the webinar with you. If for some reason you're unable to access the link that's listed here, please try refreshing your browser or using a different browser. For example, if you're using Internet Explorer, you could use Google Chrome or Firefox. And if you have any questions or concerns about registration or attendance, please email americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org. And please also add us, americanenglishwebinars@elprograms.org, to your contacts in your email account so that the email reminders don't go to your spam or junk folders. So thank you again so much for attending. Please go ahead and follow that link. And if you have trouble with it, go ahead and try refreshing that browser. Try a couple of times. If it doesn't work, it usually works in 1 or 2 tries. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on February 3rd and on the Ning. Take care.